If it isn't love, why do I feel this way? Why does she stay on my mind? And if it isn't love, why does it hurt so bad? Makes me feel so sad inside. The New Edition Heartbreak album, probably the greatest transition album in the history of R&B pop. This was the album that let the world know that New Edition was no longer the young teenage heartthrob bubblegum R&B pop group that they were starting with Candy Girl. These guys were now officially men, and there was a much more mature sound thanks to the production genius of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and to the arrival of new member Johnny Gill. And to think that this album almost didn't happen because at the time in 87 there was a lot of internal conflict going on. I mean, for one, as everybody knows, Bobby Brown was voted out the group, and he would put two solo albums that would break him as the first New Edition member to have extreme pop solo success when he dropped King of Stage, which did moderately successful, and then of course Don't Be Cruel, which made him into a superstar. And at that time, Ralph was looking at Bobby like, I need to be doing, my own thing as well and doing some stuff because, as I said before, there was a lot of internal conflict going on, and they were getting more bubblegum by the minute in terms of getting the same producers. They had did the Under the Blue Moon album, and that was an album that was their take on the 1950s classics, which is a classic album to this day. But at that time, it didn't really resonate with their normal young audience because I think if you were 15 or 14 years old at that time, I don't think your favorite R&B young group, you didn't want to hear them doing songs from the 1950s. But nevertheless, it's still a great album. But at that time, it didn't have the sales impact. It didn't really do what it was supposed to do. And they were really at a critical standpoint, especially with Bobby Brown ruling the charts. And also these other groups that were coming out of nowhere, pretty much borrowing the New Edition blueprint. I mean, here you had New Kids on the Block, and then you had a couple of other groups that were coming out of like H-Town, different things of that nature. It was really, really a situation where you couldn't afford to be lagging behind, especially if you were the group that helped start this whole thing. And Michael Bivins went to Johnny Gill and asked him to be a part of New Edition. And I hear that it was more so in fear of the fact that they would lose a lead singer if Ralph had really officially decided to go solo. And as it turns out, Ralph wasn't ready to go solo, and he initially didn't even want Johnny in the group. And especially more the reason because New Edition, as everybody knows, it's a Boston thing, and Johnny Gill is from D.C., and he didn't really see what Johnny Gill can bring to the table, though he did respect him as the vocalist that he was, because everybody knew that Johnny Gill was already a mature R&B vocalist in his own right with the songs that he did with Stacey Lattisaw, like Perfect Combination, and his own composition, Have Crazy, on the two solo albums that he did for Atlantic Records at that time. So it didn't really make sense to Ralph at the beginning, and also because Johnny Gill, unlike the rest of the fellas in the group, he wasn't a dancer. Johnny Gill, like myself, came from a very strong church vocal background. So it was almost like, how can he fit into this puzzle? And the genius of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, once again, pretty much made everything work because the songs that you hear on this album to this very day is Ralph's favorite album for that reason, because the songs really reflected the input that the group had in this album in terms of the songwriting, even the way they wanted the songs to be sung. I mean, joints like Can You Stand the Rain are still classic to this day. You're Not My Kind of Girl, one of my favorite songs. The song that sent the message out to the competition, which is This Is Where It Started From. And one of my favorite songs is That's the Way I'm Living. Crucial, produced by Jelly Bean Johnson, who was also the drummer for the time. Mars Day in the time, everybody know Jelly Bean was the drummer for that group. I'm Coming Home, and of course, one of my favorite songs, and the song that Johnny Gill originally hated, which was, of course, Boys to Men. It was never released as a single, but as every New Edition fan knows, it's one of the most popular songs on the album. And, Johnny Gill was very pissed off that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis gave him this track by himself, and he didn't really think much of it. But at the end of the day, the same vocal that we hear on that particular song is one of Johnny Gill's best performances and established what his role in the group was as far as being a vocalist. So once again, the combination of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis production and the group's growth as singers, because this time you got a chance to hear Ronnie singing a couple of parts, Biv singing a couple of parts. A lot more hip hop involved, but still staying true to the essence of what was going on at that time. The choreography got even sicker. And definitely the lead vocal exchanges between Ralph, Johnny, and Ricky was just incredible. So once again, if it wasn't for this album, New Edition would have been behind as far as the competition with an R&B groups. And this album pretty much let the competition know that we ain't going nowhere. We are still here. We are the blueprint for what y'all guys are doing now. And that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite albums in the group's entire catalog, be it solo or individually. As a matter of fact, this album opened the door for their solo careers, because right after this album sold 2 or 3 million copies and put them back on the map now as official adult stars. Basically, Johnny Gill went off and did his classic solo project, which established him once again as one of R&B's greatest vocalists. Then Ralph finally released his solo album, establishing his own sound outside of the New Edition sound. And then, of course, Belle Biv DeVoe, which basically was formed thanks to the idea of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis suggesting that they become a group, because when Ralph and Johnny went up to do their solo albums, they didn't know what they were going to do. And Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis suggested, why don't y'all become a trio? And they didn't just become a trio, they became a groundbreaking trio. And trust me, I am working on the homage blog for the Poison album to let y'all know how influential Belle Biv DeVoe was outside of their New Edition counterparts. So once again, salute to Ronnie, Ricky, Johnny, Ralph, and Mike for putting together one of the greatest R&B pop albums of all time and further establishing themselves as the blueprint for all the groups that came after them and even a little bit before them. My Generation's Temptations. Love y'all. New Edition style. LEW.